How to sell your idea to a business. Learn how to start making money by licensing your invention, as well as the step-by-step you need to follow to ensure no one steals your idea along the way. A must-watch for those who have a keen mind for inventing but no knack for running a day-to-day business, or those who actually are good at both. Find out the 6 key steps to licensing your invention idea and bringing to market that great gem you've been hiding for so long in your mind or in your secret invention lab. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. I hope you are doing fantastic today. I'm doing fantastic. I'm doing great, marvelous. If you are doing as great as I am, go grab a cup of coffee or tea or vodka. Let's roll. Today, I want to talk to you about how to sell your idea to a business. 6 steps, 6 key steps. Number 1, collect relevant information. We are in the information age right now, so the more info you are armed with, the better you will be, right? The better off you will be. So licensing your idea is no exception. Before you even think about reaching out to prospective companies to sell your idea, be sure you're comfortable and clear in the following areas. You want to know your market. In other words, you want to gather as much feedback and intel as possible on your own invention idea, right? You want to do some group testing among friends and family and colleagues. That's a good way. You can also gather data on similar and competing products. So you want to know what's already out there, who's selling it, what's selling, right? You want to do some legal legwork. You can hire a lawyer, or you can go as far as you can determine if your invention is patentable. In other words, is this worthy of a patent? You can go to the USPTO website, the United States Patent and Trademarks Office, to really know if that product falls under one of those, the broad categories. And also you want to figure out if this product can be produced without infringement on other filed patents. So this is very important. The website for the USPTO is USTPO rather, U.S. Trademarks and Patent Office, USTPO.gov, and that will let you know whether you're on the right track. You also want to think about production. So you want to learn about the production process so that you have a whole idea whether or not your invention calls for unique materials or unusual manufacturing techniques. If you are equipped with data, with information about your own invention, chances are at the later stages of the process, you will be able to fetch a higher price, a higher licensing price, or a higher outright price for your invention. So it always pays to do some homework, some research beforehand. Number 2, prepare a professional presentation. Now, all the data you have gathered in the first step, where I was telling you to collect relevant information, now is the time to put everything in a properly designed presentation. Now, if you have no knack for presenting or producing a palatable presentation, outsource it. There are a lot of platforms out there who can give you a great presentation for a couple of bucks. You can even hire someone locally to get the job done, right? Because this presentation will show to potential investors what your idea is about, but it also allows them to know what kind of person they're dealing with, whether the inventor is somebody serious or not, right? You have to understand that there is another important tool you need to have while presenting to investors. You need to have a 3-dimensional prototype model of your invention. You can't just say, well, this is what I believe. You need to show, not just say. If you have an invention, you need to have a prototype that epitomizes the invention. Now, when I'm talking about presentation, I'm not asking you to have a 100-page PowerPoint presentation. This could be a simple sell sheet. It could be a 1-pager, a 2-pager, or 5 pages. All right. All you want to do is you want to convey all the data you've gathered. Now, it's called a sell sheet. Some people call it sell pitch. The sell sheet should have the following information at a minimum: the problem, the challenge, or the need that the product meets. You want to talk about the product's features and benefits. You also want to indicate your product's market or potential market. Another thing investors will want to pay attention to is the legal status of your invention, right? Do you have a patent pending? Is there a copyright or trademark info? Which is why originally I was telling you to go to the uspto.gov website to get more information, right? Because before investors or a company accepts to buy your idea or license it, they want to make sure that there is no legal encroachment around it. You should also develop something called an introductory letter to accompany your sell sheet. And in that introductory letter, you, of course, the name implies it, you'll introduce yourself, you explain why you're contacting the company, and you set the time where you plan to follow up. This is more like a traditional solicitation, but if you do it right, you should be able to get a response back. Now, the thing is, you want the introductory letter to be as professional and concise as possible. You don't want to divulge your invention. You can just talk about it broadly, but not go into the nitty-gritty, because the bottom line is you want them to call you back so you can have a full conversation with them. I will be right back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. We are having a conversation today about how to sell your idea to a business. Number 3, zero in on your targets. Just so you remember, the first 2 items were you want to gather relevant information, you want to prepare a professional presentation, and now you want to zero in on your targets. Now you've gathered your info, you prepared all your information. The next step, you need to determine the most proper context for this business opportunity. So the way to do this is you do some research online. You can even buy some data from some of those providers. You have D&B, Dun & Bradstreet. They can sell you data based on the niches that you have identified. First, have a list of at least 50 prospective targets, because the bottom line here is you want to have more prospects, right? The more prospects, the better. It's a numbers game if you think about it. Most companies will turn you down. That's for sure. They'll turn you down for one reason or another. So the more prospects you have, the better. So I would say target somewhere between 50 and 100 companies and send them the intro letter, the introductory letter, and the sales sheet. Now, how can you identify companies that might make a good fit? If this is a consumer item, you just want to go to a store where you would expect to see your product sold, and jot down the names of manufacturers who produce similar products, right? You may also be familiar with many of these companies from your prior market research, which is, if you know your invention pretty well, chances are you know the market that this invention will fit into. There is another way to identify prospective manufacturers, is to look at the trade association that serves the industry in which your products will fall. So you can go to their websites, you can look for a member list, you can look for upcoming events. Some trade associations will list the manufacturers scheduled to exhibit at their upcoming trade shows. That's wonderful, isn't it, right? You can also look into online databases. Those are great resources. You have local public libraries, business libraries, right? Those are often linked to database systems that allow you to search for companies in specific industries. So from your computer, you can visit, for instance, www.hoovers.com. That's a fantastic online database that offers a diverse array of information about many large-sized businesses. Now, the idea is not to sell the idea. The bottom line is you don't want to sell the idea to a small business. You want to sell it to a deep-pocketed company. Now, if you go on Hoover, you can even find companies that have specific keywords in their description. Number 4, you want to narrow down the list of serious targets, right? So once you zero in on your targets, you have a list of 50 to 100. Now is the time to narrow down the list of serious targets. And I think you want to go from 100 to 25 or 20. Now, there are a couple of things you need to pay attention to when narrowing down the list, right? You need to pay attention to a couple of metrics. Number one, the size. The larger the better. Large companies, they are just easy to identify, and generally they have terrific distribution. So, small companies might stand to benefit more from your invention, but as I told you earlier, they don't have a deep pocket. They have less in-house product development staff, and they're less burdened by red tape, right? So you don't want to have that in your corner. You also want to think about geography. You don't want to limit yourself to local companies. Of course, they offer advantages, but in our research, depending upon your products, you have to identify whether this is good for the local market or the global market. Local or global, because businesses in nearby allow you to leverage any contacts you might have locally and set up face-to-face meetings, which is always valuable. So you have to look at the pros and cons. Actually, this is a decision that you have to make based on the products and also the particular niche, the particular sector you're currently in. You also want to think about when it comes to qualifying prospective licensees, you want to think about similar product line, because the closer your invention fits a company's already existing product line, the more sense it makes for them to take it on, right? As long as there's no cannibalism, right? The product is not directly competing with their existing product line. So if a licensee, a potential licensee, sees that your product gives them a competitive edge over a rival company, chances are they are going to give you the opportunity to come in for an interview. You also want to think about whether you have access to a decision maker, because the more easily you can identify and directly reach a decision maker, the more efficient your contact with a prospective licensee will be, right? I'm not asking you to pick up the phone and just call people like all the time and become a telemarketer. The idea is to be very strategic about identifying a decision maker, a CFO, a CEO, somebody in the executive suite. And there are a lot of ways to do this. You can go through LinkedIn, you can go through your personal contacts, you can go through an industry group. But the idea is to get to the top echelons of the business. Also, you want to think about the company policy, because some companies' policies are very strict when it comes to accepting submissions from inventors, and some not. So you want to think about those that have inventor-friendly submission policies. Another thing you want to pay attention to is the reputation, right? The manufacturer reputation. Is the company's track record for working with inventors fantastic? I'm not talking here about the company's overall reputation with consumers. No, we're only worried about inventors at this moment, right? So you want to see whether they've been great working with inventors in the past, and if possible, try to get some personal references from those who've gone before you. So those are the 6 criteria you want to use when it comes to narrowing down the list of serious targets. So size, geography, similar product line, access to a decision maker, company policy, and manufacturer reputation. I'll be right back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. We want to continue our conversation around how to sell your idea to your business. And I want to talk to you about something very important. This is great. This is very, very important when it comes to selling your idea to a business. This is the legal stuff. So step number 5, take care of the legal stuff. You want to do 2 things, 2 important things. Hire a patent lawyer or any other legal experts who has a knack for all things IP, so intellectual property. And you want to have the reason why you want to have a lawyer is that he or she can help protect your invention and your rights. So number one, you hire a lawyer, and number two, you want to think about something called provisional patent applications and non-disclosure agreements. Those are the two important strategies for safeguarding your rights. So under the tutelage of the lawyer, you want to file a provisional patent application. Now, if your invention potentially qualifies for a patent, it may be worth your while to file a provisional patent application. And this is as of 2020, you pay around $75 for micro entities, and by doing that, you obtain patent pending status. Most often, this will deter infringers because they will see that you are serious in protecting your legal rights. Right? If you're having a conversation with manufacturers and they check your patent and they see the patent pending status, that's a great thing to have. Right? So that's number one. So you need to file a provisional patent application. Number two, use non-disclosure agreements, NDAs. Now, if you determine that the invention is probably non-patentable, in other words, you can't patent it, the most effective way to protect yourself is to have prospective licensees sign a non-disclosure agreement before you reveal your invention. Now, this document is sometimes called NDA or confidentiality agreement, but the terms are similar. So when you hear NDA, confidentiality agreement, non-disclosure agreement, all of those things are similar. The agreement must be signed before you meet with a potential buyer or licensee, and thus before you disclose any secrets. Right? Because if someone signs a disclosure agreement and later uses your secret without authorization, you can sue for damages. Because the NDA, believe it or not, is a contract like any other. And if the company breaches, you can seek a finding of liability and contractual damages. Now, NDAs vary in format. Typically, they contain these important elements. So you have a definition of what is and what is not confidential information, obligations of the party receiving confidential information, and applicable time periods. So an NDA might also provide for arbitration of any dispute, since arbitration is a confidential process. So if you were forced to sue in standard litigation, you might be forced to further reveal your secrets in open courts, right? So this is something you want to pay attention to. Now, another thing you have to sort of think about is you have to define what qualifies as confidential information. Now, every non-disclosure agreement will exclude some information from protection, meaning that the receiving party has no obligation to protect that information. So information generally is not protected if it was created or discovered before or independent of any involvement with you. Generally, not every single topic you discuss in a pitch meeting will be confidential, so only the information specific to your invention or method will qualify under the NDA. So all of these things may sound a little technical, but they are important, especially if you're dealing with an invention that could revolutionize the market or industry or pay you millions of dollars in licensing royalties. All right. Now, the obligation of the party receiving the confidential information they vary. In most situations, the person or company you are sharing confidential information with must hold the information in confidence and limits its use. So under most state laws in the United States, the receiving party cannot breach the confidential relationship, induce others to breach it, or induce others to acquire the confidential information by improper means. Now you have to understand that in the industry, most companies accept these obligations without discussion because they understand if you enter into a mutual non-disclosure agreement where you also agree to keep information confidential, you should also feel comfortable with these requirements. Now, there's something we have to think about here. What are the applicable time periods? In other words, how long must the information be kept confidential? Now, this is something you have to negotiate. This is something your lawyer will have to negotiate with the other party's lawyer. Disclosing parties want a long period, while receiving parties likely want a short one, right? So 5 years is generally a common length in the United States and Canada, although most companies insist on no more than 2 or 3 years, right? We've seen in Europe, for instance, in some parts of Asia, the period can be as long as 10 years. So ultimately, the result depends on the relative bargaining power of the parties. Another thing you want to think about here when it comes to NDA is you have to ask yourself, how long will the information be held critical before others stumble upon the same innovation? That's one. Number two, if the product were licensed in the next year or two, how long would it before the secrets, quote unquote, that secret, will be figured out by competitors, right? So that's very important. I'll be right back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. I hope you are doing fantastic here. We are continuing our conversation. We are about to wrap up today's show. How to sell your idea to a business. That's the topic of today's conversation. And the next and last step is to make the sale. You know, you have the information, you have presentation materials, you have a hot prospect list, you have a lawyer. Now you have to think about, and the party they have agreed to an NDA, right? So you want to keep the following points in mind as you are negotiating your deal. First, you want to set realistic expectations. In other words, now is not the time to expect $1 million deal. You're not going to retire after licensing your first products. So don't, keep expectations reasonable. Number two, go with your hunch. Go with your instincts. You want to get as much upfront cash, right? As high a royalty or as high an annual minimum payment as possible. The manufacturer on the other side will be gunning for less risk, which means they want to give you a lower upfront payment, lower minimum payment requirements, and as low a royalty percentage as possible. Now, let's get into the nitty gritty here. Let's explain what those things means. To close the deal, you have to think about upfront payment. Now, what is upfront payment? This is the money that the licensee, in other words, the company you are giving the invention to, pays the licensor, you, upfront, before development or sales even begin, for the assignment of the rights. So this can be an outright payment, but most commonly takes the form of an advance against future royalties, right? So the amount of upfront payment varies. However, is not as usual for an inventor to seek an upfront payment that covers the cost of her patent filing, right? Another way to come to an agreeable sum is to base your payments on projected sales expectations for the first year. Think about it in terms of when you have those those celebrities writing books, they write memoirs, right? And the publisher gives them an advance on royalties. So they give them $1 million upfront payment to cover, whatever cost they have, and they deduct that from future royalties. This is not a bonus. It's more an advance against future royalties. Now, speaking of royalties, what are they? These are the payments made to the licensor based on the percentage of the licensee's product sales. So for instance, let's say you agree with your licensee to a 2% or 3% or 5% royalty. That means that you are receiving 5% of the wholesale price of each unit sold. Now in the United States, the typical royalty range tends to run from 2 to 6%. Again, it depends on the industry. It depends on the company you're dealing with. But the royalty is really the most important element of the agreement. Because think about it. If your product takes off, if the product responds to the product, if the market rather responds to the product, then the manufacturer will do well. And you, the inventor, you can earn a good stream of income over the long run. There is another term that comes in play when people talk about making the sales. Is the annual minimum. Annual minimum is generally the contractual amount that the licensee, the company you give your license, your idea with to, has to pay you, the licensor. So they have to pay you a minimum amount of royalties, irrespective of the actual royalties due from sales. So what this means, think of it as if you were a salesperson, you get a fixed salary and you have a variable salary, a bonus based on the sales, right? So the purpose of annual minimums is to ensure that the manufacturer places sufficient effort and resources behind promoting the products, right? So you want to sort of get that. Now, the annual minimums are most important in the initial years of the agreement when the product is being launched, to ensure that the licensee adequately prioritize these items when deploying sales resources. Another thing you want to think about is exclusivity. So if the agreement is exclusive, that means that the manufacturer has exclusive rights to distribute the products globally. However, this is subject to negotiation because some parties might want to limit the geography. You might say, well, I give you exclusivity in the United States and Canada, but you want to sell those rights in Europe to another company, in Africa to another company, in Asia to other companies. But this is something you have to negotiate with the licensee. All right, this was it, folks. How to sell your idea to a business. Quickly recap here: 6 steps. Collect relevant information. Prepare a professional presentation. Zero in on your targets. Narrow down the list of serious targets. Take care of the legal stuff and make the sale. I will see you next time. And until then, remember, stay marvelous.